They wanted you to learn your place, and the place they chose for you was beneath them. Quiet, compliant, grateful for whatever they decided to give you, available whenever they needed you, understanding whenever they disappointed you, forgiving whenever they hurt you, and silent whenever the truth made them uncomfortable. That was the position they had assigned to you. They wanted you close enough to benefit from, but never powerful enough to challenge them. They wanted your love without having to respect you, your loyalty without having to be loyal to you, your support without ever having to support you, your understanding without ever taking the time to understand you. And for a while, they may have believed that that arrangement was working because you cared. You tried to keep the peace. You gave people chances. You considered their feelings. You questioned yourself before accusing somebody else. You tried to understand where they were coming from. And because you moved with empathy, they assumed you didn't recognize what was happening. They mistook your patience for permission. They mistook your forgiveness for forgetfulness. They mistook your silence for agreement. They mistook your willingness to work things out for an inability to walk away. But you saw more than they realized. You noticed how the rules always changed when those rules applied to them. You noticed how they expected grace but gave you judgment. You noticed how they demanded respect while speaking to you any kind of way. You noticed how their needs were treated like emergencies while yours were treated like inconveniences. You noticed that whenever you expressed pain, the conversation somehow became about how your pain made them feel. And when you finally began speaking up, they acted like you had changed. They said you were becoming difficult, cold, disrespectful, selfish, unreasonable. They might have told people that you thought you were better than everybody, but that wasn't what happened. You didn't begin believing you were better than them. You simply stopped agreeing that you were beneath them. There is a difference. You stopped shrinking to make them comfortable. You stopped apologizing for having needs. You stopped treating basic consideration like something you had to earn. You stopped accepting relationships where one person held all the power and the other person was expected to be grateful just to have a seat in the room. And that disturbed them. Not because you were doing anything wrong either, but because the version of you they benefited from was disappearing. The version of you who over-explained. The version who gave another chance before the first wound had even healed. The version who kept volunteering to carry burdens that did not even belong to you. The version who questioned your own perception every time somebody denied what they clearly did. That version of you made their life easier, you see. So when you started changing, they didn't call it growth. They called it a problem. Because people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will often experience your boundaries as betrayal. People who benefited from your silence will call your voice disrespect. People who benefited from your self-doubt will call your confidence arrogance. People who benefited from your accessibility will call your distance cruelty. But their discomfort does not mean your growth is wrong. Sometimes their discomfort is confirmation that the old arrangement no longer works. They wanted you to learn your place, but the truth is, you finally did. You learned that your place was not underneath anyone's foot. Your place was not at the bottom of somebody's priority list. Your place was not in a relationship where your humanity had to be negotiated. Your place was not beside people who only valued you when you were useful. No, your place was not inside of a cycle that required you to betray yourself to keep somebody else satisfied. You learned that your place was wherever your dignity remained intact, where your voice could exist without punishment, where your feelings were not constantly placed on trial, where your love did not require humiliation, where peace did not require silence, where belonging did not require you to disappear. And once you understood that, everything changed. They could no longer control you with withdrawal because you stopped being afraid of their absence. They could no longer control you with guilt because you learned that disappointing somebody is not the same as doing something wrong. They could no longer control you with confusion because you started trusting patterns more than promises. They could no longer control you with the threat of losing the relationship because you finally understood that losing yourself would cost you more. And that is what they never prepared for. They thought you needed their approval. They never imagined you would approve of yourself. They thought you needed their invitation. They never imagined you would build your own table. They thought you needed them to choose you. They never imagined you would stop auditioning and choose yourself. They thought they could continue moving the finish line and you would keep running, keep proving, keep explaining, Keep exhausting yourself for a price that was never going to be given fairly in the first place. But one day you stopped running. And it's not because you were weak, because you finally saw the game. And once you see the game, you can't unsee it. You begin recognizing how often certain people create relationships based on rank. Somebody has to be on top. Somebody has to be wrong. Somebody has to have the final word. Somebody has to do all the sacrificing. And they always make sure that somebody is you. But healthy love does not need a winner and a loser. Healthy relationships do not require one person to become smaller so the other person can feel secure. Real connection is not built on dominance. It's built on mutual respect, consideration, accountability, reciprocity. And that is exactly why they struggled with the new version of you, because you were no longer willing to confuse control with love. You were no longer impressed by words that were contradicted by behavior. You were no longer accepting crumbs and calling it gratitude. You were no longer treating access to you like a lifetime entitlement. You had learned your place, and your place was within your own power. This is why I always say the truth becomes impossible to ignore once you stop arguing with what you keep experiencing. You see, your experience had been telling you the truth. You were exhausted because the relationship was unequal. You were confused because the standards were inconsistent. You were losing confidence because somebody benefited from you questioning yourself. You were constantly explaining because they were committed to misunderstanding anything that required them to change. But once you stopped arguing with reality, you stopped asking them to confirm what you already knew. And that is when your power started coming back. That is why I wrote Phoenix, from stability to power. Because there comes a time when surviving is no longer enough. You have to rebuild the parts of you that learn to settle for less. You have to rebuild the trust in your own voice. You have to learn that boundaries are not disrespect, that self-respect is not arrogance, that walking away from mistreatment is not failure, and that choosing yourself does not mean you never loved them. It means you finally decided to love yourself too. You see, they wanted you to learn your place. They thought your place was behind them, beneath them, waiting for them, and available whenever they decided you were worthy of attention. But you learned something they never intended to teach you. You learned that nobody gets to assign your value. Nobody gets to decide how small you must become to remain in their life. Nobody gets unlimited access to you simply because you loved them. They wanted you obedient. You became discerning. They wanted you insecure. You became self-aware. They wanted you dependent on their approval. You became rooted in your own. They wanted you afraid to lose them. You became more afraid of losing yourself. They wanted you to stay in the place they had chosen for you, but you outgrew it. And now they have to watch you stand in rooms they thought you would never enter. Speak with confidence they tried to destroy. Protect a peace they once had power to disturb. Build a life that no longer revolves around their moods, opinions, approval, or presence. They wanted you to learn your place, and you did. You learned that your place was never beneath them. Your place was always beside people who could recognize your value, and within a life where you never had to abandon yourself to belong. Peace, blessings, love, and power.